Okay, let's talk a little bit about fractions. So the first thing I want to say before I get to the candy is we were talking about dividing fractions, right? But division is similar to multiplication in a way. So let's just talk about division for a second. Let's say I say I'm going to divide 4 by 2. What do I get if I divide 4 by 2? 2. Okay, what if I said I wanted to take 1/2 of 4? Half of 4. Basically, when I say the word of, it usually means multiplication. If I'm taking half of 4, what's that answer? Half of 4 is also 2. So these are the same exact things. Now notice the reciprocal of 2 is 1/2. And also this division sign is a little tiny miniature fraction. Basically this means the same thing as 4 divided by 2 that's another way of writing it as a fraction, which is the same thing as 4 times 1/2, because when we do 4 times 1/2 we go 4 over 1 times 1 over 2. When we multiply fractions, we can always cross cancel, right? What can we cross cancel here? Yeah, this 2 goes in here once, 2 goes in here twice. We multiply across, we get 2 over 1. Now, let's imagine for a minute I brought this candy bar to class. I did. You imagined it and it happened, okay? Let's imagine that we did. This is my favorite candy bar because it has no sugar in it, but it does actually still taste good if you end up wanting to taste it in the end. So imagine now I open my candy bar and I'm about ready to have my chocolate, and along comes someone. I have a whole bar here, right? Along comes someone and they say, oh, I really want to try that. And I'm knowing that I probably shouldn't eat the whole bar of chocolate. So I say, okay, great. Let's divide it into 2 pieces. In other words, let's cut it in half, right? So if I have 1 candy bar and I divide it by 2, what do I get? 1 divided by 2 is 1/2. Oh, I get 2 pieces. I get how you're getting 2. I get 2 pieces, but I only get half the bar, right? So here, right here, we can see that this represents half of the bar. So I don't have the whole bar, I have half the bar. Now, another friend of mine comes along and they say, well, I'm about ready to eat half the bar myself, but they say, well, I would really like to try your chocolate bar. Can I have half of your half? What would be half of my half? In other words, what's half divided by 2? That would be, I don't know why I put that in parentheses there, but 1/2 divided by 2 is the same thing as half of half. What is half of a half? A quarter, because we multiply across, right? Half of half. If I divide by 2, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. And we can see now, actually, I didn't try this out previously. I just eat the whole bar, so it doesn't actually divide up very evenly. But let's just wing it. Okay, that's actually not half. This is a bad example. Let's draw it out instead. We'll put the candy bar away. It's just for fun, okay, for effect. It's delicious too. Okay, so let's actually draw. Let's look at this on our fraction chart. Imagine now that the top fraction, wait, that's not a fraction, that's a whole thing, right? The top one is the whole candy bar, the 1 whole candy bar. So when I divide it in half, there's my half. Half of half is a quarter. What if I take half of a quarter? If I line this up here, 1/8. 1/8 is half of a quarter. And what do you guys think? So let's write this out. We said 1/4 divided by 2 is the same thing as 1/4 times 1/2, which is what? You just said it. 1/8. Okay, so let's say we had 1/8 of the chocolate bar now. and we wanted to split that in half. What would be half of the 8th? 1/16. Because we have 1/8 times the reciprocal of 2. What's the reciprocal of 2? We flip it, right? 2 over 1 becomes 1 over 2. And if we multiply across, we get 1/16. You can kind of see that in a cookie example. This is the exact same story, okay? But let's do it in a cookie shape, a round circle. The Cookie Monster comes in, and instead of eating the whole cookie, he decides one day he's going to eat half the cookie. Right? So he eats this. This is gone. He has half left. The next day, he decides he's going to eat half of his half. So we cut that in half. Do you see that that is a quarter that he's eating? Yeah? And there's a quarter left. If we take half of the quarter, we would get 1/8. Good. If we take half of the 1/8, we would get 1/16. Are you starting to see a pattern here? If we take half of the 16th, half of the 16th, half of the 16th would be 132. So this little piece, 132. As the denominator gets bigger, what is happening to the size of the piece? It gets smaller. Okay? Can I cut it up even smaller? Right. I wouldn't get to eat very much chocolate, or in this case, cookie, right? So half of the, that's about half. That's not a very accurate drawing, but half of the 32nd is the, what do you think? 1/2 of 132 is 1/64. 1/64ths. And could I keep cutting this up by half every time? It'd be like crumbs, exactly. But this is actually the idea of an advanced math, or actually even science idea, is the idea of half-life. Has anyone ever heard of half-life before? Well, when you get into your advanced chemistry classes, maybe you'll talk about. Oh, you've heard of half-life, okay? So every single time we're still able to take half, but it is getting tinier and tinier and tinier, right? So if we even take half of the 64th, I can't even hardly see that anymore. Does anybody know what fraction that would be, though? 128th would be. And we can actually keep doing that for infinity, but they will get smaller and smaller and smaller. It's the idea of it will approach 0, but it will never actually become 0. Yes. So that's just a little bit about, what's that? There would be 0. Yes, you're right. The number wouldn't be 0, but you would essentially have 0 cookie left. This is exactly right. You would have a tiny, speck of cookie. It'd be really hard to cut in half. Okay, any questions about this? Anything you want to say or ask about? Why are we flipping it? Because the same thing, multiplying by 1/2 is the same thing as dividing by 2. Right? So let's think about this for a minute. If I want to make, let's say I have the fraction 5/4. How would I make that equal to 1? In other words, undoing, when I have 5/4, it's the same thing as multiplying a number by 5. I'm multiplying by the numerator. I'm dividing by the denominator. So what number could I divide by 4 that would give me 1? If I divide 4, right. What number could I divide into 5 that would give me 1? 5 divided by 5 gives me 1. So essentially, undoing multiplying by 5 and dividing by 4 would be doing the opposite. Multiplying by 4, dividing by 5. And we call this number, what's the relationship between those two numbers? They're called reflipricals of each other. Oh, I mean reciprocals. Reflipricals? Because we flip it. So anytime you multiply a number by its reciprocal, you get 1, essentially doing the opposite, right? When I have a fraction, just like we said, this is the same problem as 5 divided by 4, right? You see the little divide sign is a fraction, which basically means I have 5, I'm dividing it by 4. If I want to do the opposite of that, I could have 4 and divide by 5. How do I get 1 here? 5, how come when I multiply a number by its reciprocal I get 1? Well, what's 5 times 4? 20, right? What's 4 times 5? What's 20 over 20? 1.